They say destiny whispers early. Mine began not with a sword, but with a book. Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. I was a boy then, no more than 9, hiding under the orange trees of Ajaccio, Corsica, reading tales of Caesar, while the world laughed at the thought of a Corsican peasant dreaming of greatness. But I wasn't like the others. My father was a lawyer with a taste for aristocratic approval. My mother, Letizia, was iron-wrapped in silk. Disciplined, silent, and fierce, she bore 13 children. I was second, but I always believed I was first in fate. Corsica was wild. Though we were technically French subjects, we considered ourselves a people apart. The island pulsed with resistance, and I admired our revolutionary leader, Pasquale Paoli. But by the time I was born in 1769, the French had taken control, and Paoli was exiled. My father submitted, signed treaties, and won us French citizenship. That's how I ended up in France, a Corsican among Parisians, a foreigner among aristocrats. I was 10 when I enrolled at Brienne, a military academy full of noble sons and pampered legacies. They called me the Little Corporal, mocked my accent, my short stature, my olive skin. I didn't fight back with fists. I fought with silence and obsession. While they danced and flirted, I devoured books on mathematics, geography, and war. While they laughed, I planned. One teacher saw it in me. Napoleon, he said, has fire in his soul. He wasn't wrong. By the time I was 16, I graduated from École Militaire in Paris, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. While others sought glory in salons, I buried myself in calculations of trajectories, wind, and impact. War was not just chaos, it was an equation. And I was already solving it. The French Revolution exploded in 1789. I was 20, ambitious, and invisible to the nobility. But as the old world burned, I saw the ashes as opportunity. I aligned myself with the Jacobin, not because of their ideals, but because they were the ones rising. My loyalty was not to politics, it was to momentum. In 1793, Toulon became my first real stage. The city had fallen into royalist hands, supported by the British. The revolutionary government sent a ragged army to take it back. I was a captain, barely, but I noticed a weakness in the enemy lines that no one else saw. I presented a plan. They ignored me, so I acted without permission. One positioned artillery on the heights and decimated the British fleet. The city fell. I rose. They promoted me to brigadier general at 24. Some called it luck. Others called it audacity. I called it inevitability. France, by the mid-1790s, was a storm. The monarchy had fallen. The guillotine sliced through aristocratic bloodlines daily. No one was safe, not even revolutionaries themselves. Robespierre, once the symbol of revolutionary justice, was executed by the very machine he commanded. While France screamed for order, I was quietly preparing for domination. The revolution gave me space to rise. Old ranks crumbled. Noble birth no longer determined your worth. Action did, and I acted. In 1795, chaos gripped Paris again. Royalists planned a coup. The government, desperate, needed someone, anyone, who could keep order. They remembered Toulon. They remembered me. I was 26, a general with no army, but a mind like flint. I was handed command of the defense of the capital. As the royalist mob surged forward, I ordered cannons loaded with grape shot, aimed directly at the heart of the rebellion. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate. I gave the order. The streets of Paris echoed with screams. Blood soaked the cobblestones, and order was restored. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize, and from that moment, the name Napoleon Bonaparte spread like wildfire through France. They made me commander of the Army of the Interior. Then, just as quickly, they reassigned me. This time to the Army of Italy, a ragged collection of starving men with no boots, low morale, and dwindling ammunition. They sent me to babysit a doomed campaign. Instead, I turned it into legend. Italy was where I became a myth. I whipped the army into shape, inspired them with promises of plunder, glory and revenge. We marched on the Austrians like ghosts with bayonets. Victory after victory, Montenotte, Lodi, Arcole, Rivoli. I tore apart the Habsburg war machine with speed and precision they'd never seen before, and I did it with flair. I gave rousing speeches. I rode into battle ahead of my men. I sent back romantic reports to Paris, crafting the image of a dashing, heroic general. I made war look like poetry, but beneath the theatrics was cold calculation. I understood terrain like a chessboard. I knew when to press and when to feint. I didn't just fight, I commanded. With fewer men and worse supplies, I defeated armies that were supposedly invincible. By 1797, I forced Austria to the negotiating table. France's map changed because of me, and yet, I wanted more. So when they offered me command of an Egyptian expedition, I took it. Not for glory, but for legacy. I wanted to be a modern Alexander. I wanted to open the East to French influence, and yes, perhaps, I wanted the crown without having to ask. Egypt was a disaster militarily. The British Navy, under Nelson, destroyed our fleet at the Battle of the Nile. But even that defeat became fuel for my legend. I brought scholars, scientists, and artists to Egypt. We studied ancient ruins. We discovered the Rosetta Stone. I told the world I wasn't just a general. I was a visionary. While France burned in political infighting, I returned from Egypt not as a failure, but as the only man who could save the Republic. So I did what any Corsican-born outsider with a genius for war and a taste for destiny would do. I staged a coup. By 1799, the so-called French Republic was a walking corpse. The Directory, a chaotic five-man executive, was paralyzed by corruption, gridlock, and fear. The people were hungry, tired of instability, desperate for a savior. I became that savior. With my brother Lucien and a few loyal soldiers, we executed the coup of 18 Brumaire. Guns drawn, papers forged, the chambers stormed. I dissolved the old government with the poise of a statesman and the ruthlessness of a general. I told them I was defending liberty. What I was really doing was claiming the future. They made me first consul of France. But being first consul wasn't enough. I needed the crown. But not through tradition, not through divine right. I would crown myself. I would redefine power. So in 1804, inside the Notre Dame Cathedral, Pope Pius VII stood ready to crown me Emperor of the French. A moment of sacred legitimacy, centuries in the making, but I didn't wait. I took the crown from the Pope's trembling hands, turned to the people, and placed it on my own head. That wasn't just a moment of theatre. It was a message. I answer to no one. As Emperor, I built a dynasty from scratch. I forged the Napoleonic Code, revolutionized civil law, education, infrastructure, and banking. I introduced meritocracy. I wasn't just a conqueror. I was a reformer. I gave France structure. But I knew order meant nothing without glory. So I waged war again. Austria, Russia, Prussia, they formed coalitions against me. They called me a tyrant, a butcher, a usurper. I proved them weak. In 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, my masterpiece, I faced a massive armies, the Austrians and Russians, under Tsar Alexander I and Emperor Francis II. They had the high ground, the numbers, and the arrogance. I had a plan. I feigned weakness, drew them in, and struck with terrifying precision. The fog lifted, the sun rose. The sun of Austerlitz, they called it, and the world changed. I shattered their lines, captured thousands, and brought emperors to their knees. It wasn't just a battle, it was art. But while Europe bowed, England remained defiant. I tried to crush them economically with the continental system. I banned European nations from trading with Britain, trying to strangle their empire with embargoes. It backfired. Smuggling flourished. Allies turned resentful. Trade collapsed. And then, like an overreaching gambler, I invaded Spain. It was meant to be quick, a show of dominance. But the Spanish, armed with guerrilla tactics and British support, led me slowly. My brother Joseph, whom I installed as king, was despised. What was meant to be a victory became a quagmire. It was my first real stumble, but I couldn't stop. Russia loomed. Tsar Alexander I defied my blockade, and I made the worst decision of my life. I invaded. In 1812, I led 600,000 men, the largest army Europe had ever seen, into Russia. It would end in fire, frost, and death. 1812 was the year I gambled everything. The Russians had disrespected my continental system, the linchpin of my economic war against Britain. I told myself I couldn't allow defiance, but in truth, it was pride, hubris. I saw myself as untouchable. I thought Russia would fall as easily as Austria or Prussia. So I gathered over 600,000 men. French, Italians, Poles, Germans, even reluctant allies. We called it La Grande Army, but Russia wasn't France. The land itself was my enemy. The Russians didn't fight fair. They retreated deeper into their vast terrain, burning everything: food, shelter, hope. They used the scorched earth tactic like an artist wields a brush, painting starvation across every horizon. We marched 4 months with nothing to eat but frost. In September, I reached Moscow, but the Russians had abandoned it. Worse, they had set it ablaze. The city burned as my men shivered. No supplies, no peace treaty, nothing but smoke and ruin. Winter was coming. I stayed too long, thinking I could wait it out. I couldn't. We began the retreat, but the real horror had just begun. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Horses froze standing up. Men collapsed mid-step and never rose again. Starvation turned soldiers into cannibals. Wolves followed us like vultures. Crossing the Berezina River became a massacre. Bridges broke under cannon fire. The current swallowed thousands. By the time we reached friendly ground, fewer than 100,000 of my original 600,000 remained. Some say only 10,000 were still fit to fight. It wasn't a defeat. It was annihilation. But I wasn't done. Europe smelled blood. The Sixth Coalition formed. Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, all against me. At the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, I faced over 300,000 enemies. My forces were outnumbered, my generals fatigued, my allies deserting. After 3 days of brutal combat, the Saxons, my supposed allies, turned on me mid-battle. I lost. The retreat turned France into open prey. One by one, my territories crumbled. The enemies closed in. By 1814, Paris itself was under siege. I abdicated. They sent me to Elba, a tiny island off Italy's coast, thinking they'd buried me in irrelevance. But they had underestimated my ambition and the loyalty I still commanded. I escaped. They thought I was done, exiled, forgotten, broken. But the soul of an emperor doesn't die quietly. On February 26, 1815, I left Elba with 1,000 loyal men and set sail for France. No army, no cannons, just belief, and a nation that still remembered who I was. Louis XVIII's troops were sent to arrest me. I stood before them unarmed and opened my coat. "If any of you would shoot your emperor," I shouted, "here I am." They dropped their weapons and cheered. Village by village, battalion by battalion, France returned to me like a prodigal child. In 3 weeks, I was back in Paris. The throne was mine again. They called it the 100 Days, but Europe wouldn't let me rise a second time. The Seventh Coalition formed. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, determined to end me for good, so I prepared for one last war. My enemy, the Duke of Wellington, leading British and Allied forces in Belgium. Prussian General Blucher marched nearby. If they united, I'd be crushed. My plan was brilliant: divide and conquer. Strike before they could join. At Ligny, I defeated Blucher's Prussians. Then I turned toward Wellington at Waterloo. The morning of June 18, 1815, the skies poured. Mud slowed my cannons, and timing slipped. I should have struck earlier. I delayed. When battle erupted, it was thunderous. My cavalry charged again and again. But Wellington's lines held, squares unbroken. Then came the Prussians. Blucher, though wounded, had rallied and marched through the night. They struck my flank. Panic surged. Morale crumbled. The Imperial Guard, the finest men I ever commanded, advanced for a final stand, and even they broke. Waterloo wasn't just a defeat. It was destiny snapping its fingers. I fled. Days later, I abdicated once more. They wouldn't take chances this time. No Elba. They sent me to St. Helena, a rock in the South Atlantic, where no dreams could grow. I lived 6 more years there, sick, isolated, and surrounded by British guards. But even in my final breath, I believe this: Waterloo may have ended my reign, but not my legend. I died on May 5, 1821, on a wind-beaten rock far from home. Some say it was stomach cancer, others whisper of poison, but the truth: my greatest battle was already lost, and yet, in death, I became eternal. They buried me in anonymity at first, but I always knew history would call me back. In 1840, my remains were returned to France in a grand ceremony. The people lined the streets. Soldiers wept, flags bowed, Paris remembered. Now I rest beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides, a tomb worthy of emperors. But you must ask, why does my name still stir such fire? Because I left the world changed. Yes, I was a conqueror, but I was also a lawmaker. My Napoleonic code reshaped legal systems across Europe, and even beyond: property rights, civil liberties, secular governance. These didn't come from kings. They came from me. I crushed monarchies, but I unified nations. I destroyed empires, yet I created modern statehood. And I inspired millions. Not just soldiers, but thinkers, rebels, and leaders. Simon Bolivar, Sun Yat-sen. Even Abraham Lincoln studied me. Still, I am no saint. I restored slavery in French colonies. I silenced dissent. I crowned myself emperor. I betrayed revolution for stability, traded liberty for order. My ambition devoured peace. But tell me, what genius doesn't walk that line? Some say I was a tyrant in silk gloves, others, a savior in boots. But what cannot be denied is this: I was born in obscurity, rose with nothing but intellect and audacity, and bent the map of the world to my will. Who else can say that? Was I the greatest military prodigy in history? WELLA changed warfare, artillery placement, mobility, centralized command. I inspired loyalty so deep, my men would die with my name on their lips. I turned defeat into strategy, retreat into rebirth, loss into legend. But most of all, I taught the world that greatness isn't given by birth, but seized by brilliance. So yes, history may debate, but empires remember. And you just walked through the fire of my life. If this story made you see Napoleon in a different light, or if it sparked your curiosity about power, genius, and downfall, then you're exactly who this channel was made for. We dive into stories where betrayal, brilliance, and legacy collide. Stories that leave you changed. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss what history tried to hide from you.